share. Shall I just get started?
Please.
Yeah, can you see our my screen?
Rosa, we can see your notes. I think we have to swap it.
Thank you.
Yes.
You see the screen, not the notes, correct?
Yes.
Fantastic. So good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Science Subcommittee. Dr. Christie and I are going to be presenting in tandem the proposed amendments for the Discovery and the Clinical Program Awards. So these amendments have been developed by our teams to adapt to the current needs and optimize the delivery of our mission, which is to accelerate world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and the world. This presentation is structured, as I was mentioning, into two main parts. Initially, we will explore the proposed amendments for the Discovery pillar. And following that, my colleague, Dr. Christie, will guide us through the developments in the clinical pillar. For context, the Discovery pillar is composed of three types of awards. We will present amendments for the first two, which correspond to the D0 or the Foundation Awards that represent the bedrock of the Discovery pillar at CIRM, emphasizing the generation of foundational knowledge. And this program fosters initial discovery research aiming to explore novel concepts and innovative ideas that have the potential to revolutionize our understanding and treatment of diseases. These two Quest Awards, which is the other program that we will present the amends for, signify the critical transition from foundational knowledge to a targeted inquiry where specific hypotheses are tested, and these awards are designed to validate initial findings and assess their potential to result in a single product candidate for therapeutic development. So for the first program, which is the D2, the Quest Awards, we are proposing two changes. One is to the award tracks and the other is to the award budgets. And we have one slide for each in which we detail the proposed changes. Currently, so for these two awards changes in track, currently our program is structured around two tracks. The first is the therapeutic candidate track, which is dedicated to advancing projects towards a development candidate ready for progression through various stages of therapeutic development. And the second is the technology candidate track that has traditionally been aligned with diagnostic devices or tools. And what we are proposing is a strategic shift by transforming this track into a biomarker candidate track. Why are we doing this? We are proposing this, the rationale is because the tool device development segment of the current D2 is already supported by the D0 program, by the Foundational Awards. This program actually did not exist when we first developed D2. So post Proposition 14, we introduced D0, and this program encompassed tool and device development, tackling bottlenecks in cell and gene therapy and enhancing research tools, including those fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion in science. Therefore, we propose a reallocation of the tool device focus exclusively to D0, thereby eliminating redundancy in these two and making a space for the critical needed biomarker path. The inclusion of a biomarker track in these two underscores widespread demand for biomarkers. There's a big need, and it's crucial not only for general therapeutic development, but particularly vital in the realms of regenerative medicine and CNS diseases. By proposing this biomarker track, we are now expanding to support not only the diagnostic biomarkers, but to include other biomarkers linked to medical interventions or disease conditions, such as prognostic biomarkers, risk or monitoring biomarkers. The next slide has to do with the changes in budget to adapt to what we are proposing as well. So currently, the therapeutic development candidate has an allocation of $1.5 million for 3 years, and the $1.5 million is for direct project costs for the entire award. We are now proposing an increase to $1.75 million, so it's $250,000 increase. And the rationale for that is the allowance for a higher cost of trainees and research. And the second is that currently these two awards have already a supplement. We allow a $200,000 supplement for a specific project types. And what we are doing now is expanding and increasing to allow it for all awardees. And in this proposed scenario, the supplement of $200,000 could be eliminated as is already included. And obviously, anybody that asks for the maximum, the budget needs to be justified anyway. So this is going to be always reviewed by our grants working group members. For the biomarker track, we are proposing $1.5 million, which is justified in terms of duration and size of comparable awards. And we have done an analysis of other funding agencies that fund a specific biomarker early identification and early validation of biomarker projects, and it comes to about $500,000 per year in average, and it's about between 2 and 3 years. I don't know if we could, Dr. Goldstein, if you would like to stop at this 0 or for questions, or if you would like me to proceed to these two, to stop now for questions or proceed.
I'd say do the full disk load, and then we'll pause for questions and then a vote prior to ABLA presenting the CLIN proposals.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. So for the D0 foundational awards concept, we are proposing 3 changes. One is to awards tracks, the other is to award budgets, and the last one is to the PI % effort. For the award track, D0 of foundational awards currently has 1 track, is the single PI track, but beyond the unique contributions of individual innovators, CIRM recognizes the value of team science in making scientific breakthroughs that could not be achievable by individual investigators within an award period. And the D0 Foundation Awards capitalize on both approaches by supporting 2 types of programs, or would capitalize if approved this amendment. If we could support 2 types of programs, one could be the current single PI track that could support projects with discrete objectives that are achievable under the leadership of a single investigator, and then another track, the team track, that could support multidisciplinary collaborations of 2 to 3 investigators that bring a specific knowledge and skills to a project to create a unique advantage or synergy where diverse perspectives could drive innovation and creativity in regenerative medicine. This is also something that we have learned from developing, as you recently approved, the REMIND program. We are trying to stimulate team science and innovation and multidisciplinary collaboration. So that is why we are adding this track. Yeah, that's it. So the next change that we are proposing is changes in budget. Currently, the single PI track has a budget of $1 million for 3 years. This corresponds to about $333,000 in direct project costs per year. And we are proposing an increase to $500,000 per year for 3 years, a total on the single PI of $1.5 million, accounting for higher project trainees, cost, and research. And for the team track, we are doubling this, taking into account that we will have at least twice the amount of PIs, 1 main PI, and then 1 co-investigator at least, hopefully 3. Yeah, and then in terms of percent of effort, the current percent effort for the single track PI is 20% minimum effort, and we are proposing a decrease of 5% for the single PI of 15%, 1-5, and for the team track, the PI could be also 15%, 1-5, and for the co-investigators of a 10% minimum requirement. And this is from a change that we are proposing given board feedback and alignment with other funding bodies. And with that, I am finishing my presentation, and we would like to CIRM request the committee to recommend to the ICOC approval of these amendments, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great presentation, Rosa. Okay, Shlomo, you're up first.
Thank you, Rosa. That was terrific. Thank you. I have two questions. One is the term biomarkers is extremely broad. Do we have to, especially from this committee, do we have to be more granular in our definition? Because I'm concerned we're going to get swamped with all sorts of stuff, from imaging to molecular to clinical. It'll be a very, very wide catchment. So I'm wondering if that's the intent, then that's fine. But if the intent is to be more focused on stem cell specific biomarkers, I think we should be more granular. And my second comment related to the first is the effort. 15% effort seems a little bit high if you're going to do a simple biomarker. So, well, those are my two questions.
So for the first one, in terms of the biomarker, our team has already developed in the program announcement, in the concept, we have made some changes, and yes, the biomarkers could have to be related to stem cells. So you could have to either use the stem cells to discover the biomarker, and it's going to be, or that could help the advancement of therapies, clinical therapies with the biomarker discovered. Does that answer your question?
No, those are two different things. Using stem cells to discover biomarkers, or using biomarkers to measure the efficacy of stem cell therapy. Those are two different scientific questions. Are we doing both? Are we doing one? I think we should be more specific. I don't know what the intent is. If someone reads it, there are two different hypothetical approaches to this RFA.
Yes. So the type of biomarkers that we are trying to cover here could be those that support the development of the clinical use or therapeutics of the modalities that we define for the discovery research. So, for example, in the discovery research, we are allowing for therapeutics that is a cell therapy where a human or progenitor cell either compose the therapy or used to manufacture the cell therapy, or the gene therapy approach. And in terms of the biomarker, what we are asking is that support the development or the clinical use of those therapeutics. And the second is for which human or stem cell progenitor cells are uniquely enabling for the identification, testing, and validation of assessment of the therapy. So we are actually including those two types. And what I'm hearing from you is that you would like for us to be more restricted to either or?
No, but both are fine as long as we give detail, because the more detail the better. Because I just want to prevent a flood of irrelevant applications.
Yes, no, we will have...
Not irrelevant, but not relevant to our mission.
No, it's going to be relevant to the mission. I mean, the concept right now is very concrete, the way that we have explained this. But we will provide more specifics and examples when we develop the program announcement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then the second question was with regards to the percent effort.
Yeah.
And what was the question? Could you repeat it, Dr.?
15% may be high for us for a simple in vitro biomarker study.
Well, it's not a simple in vitro biomarker study. This is the development of a biomarker that supports the development of the clinical use of the therapeutics. And from what my experience has been, this requires quite a bit of effort from the PI. I see it the same as the level of a development candidate, but just in the biomarker modality. So I think that we should require 15%, especially with the budget that we are allocating.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's great. An inside baseball question, Rosa. As we increase the number and different options for these various grants, what are the implications for internal tracking of these awards? Is this going to raise the overhead substantially?
No, we don't think that, because I think it's going to actually be an advantage, because right now the tools, technology type of awards, which have currently a different budget allocation as well, they tend to not be, I think, reviewed at the same level as the others, so they don't do so well. And right now, what I think we are going to get is 2 types of awards that will be around the same, and we will just get about the same amount of awards at the end. The budget is going to be established well, for this one, the budget is already established because the next call would be in May. But I don't think it could be increasing the amount of awards. We just could have, probably our wish could be that it's have and have allocation, but it's not going to be more awards. It's just going to be different types of awards.
Great. Other questions or comments from the subcommittee? Scott, we have any public comment on the line?
Looking now, I don't see any. Claudette or Doug?
No, there are no hands raised.
Okay. So can somebody move for us to move forward?
So moved.
I second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Scott, will you please call the roll?
Sure. Haifa Abdul Haq,
Yes.
Maria Bonavie,
Yes.
Monica Carson,
Yes.
Hal Collard, Shlomo Melmed,
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbert,
Yes.
Elena Flowers,
Yes.
Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein,
Yes.
David Higgins,
Yes.
Vito Bassiani,
Yes.
Pat Levitt,
Yes.
and Chris Miaskowski.
Yes.
Great, thanks very much. That motion carries.
Okay.
Scott, this is Beth. I didn't hear the second. Who was that, please?
The second was Pat Levitt.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that recommendation will go on to the full ICOC. Next up is Abla Creasy, who will tell us about proposed amendments and changes to the CLIN award series. Abla, wherever you are.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Goldstein, members of the Science Subcommittee, CIRM colleagues, and the public. So I'm going to cover today the proposed CLIN concept amendments and share with you a new concept that we're proposing for CLIN 4. Okay, what are some of the things we're going to discuss today? We are recommending the following 4 things. One is to remove the clinical track for medical devices from the CLIN pillar. Second, increase maximum award amounts for CLIN 1. And I'll go into more details about each. Third, update CLIN2 program announcement to highlight specific allowable activities for product development. And then last would be to introduce this new CLIN4 program announcement to fund late-stage development activities that are necessary to file a biologics license application and readiness for product launch. I just would like to, before I proceed, to mention a couple of things. One is we are moving our development programs towards potential advancement for approval, as well as harmonizing with what you heard through the AAWG roadmap so that there's consistency between what we deliver for access and affordability through what clinical research is doing. So this is the most important thing here is to make sure that our portfolio is moving towards getting to the patients. So for removing the clinical track for medical devices, the rationale for doing that is we have not had any applications that are requiring medical device sanctioning by the FDA. And for that reason, we support the combination of device development with a clinical trial, with a therapeutic agent, but not necessarily a medical device alone, because we have not had those types of applications. So as a reminder, the clinical programs awards overview is on this slide. You are all familiar with CLIN1 and CLIN2. The CLIN1 is for IND enabling. This is meaning investigational of new drug. And the CLIN1 requires the teams to have conducted a pre-IND meeting, and the duration for that grant is 24 months. For the CLIN2, it is for embarking on conducting a clinical trial, and the applicants have to have an active IND, and the length of the grant is 48 months. Both grants have to start within 45 days after ICOC approval. The new concept plan for CLIN4 is really mainly focused on biologics license application enabling. We have a number of grants that are maturing towards that stage. What's the requirement for a CLIN4 concept is an active CLIN2 and an end of phase 2 meeting with FDA. And the length of this grant would be 48 months, similar to a CLIN2 application. So for CLIN1 awards, why are we making those changes? So for the length of time I've been at CIRM, 2016, almost 7 to 8 years, the CLIN1 award has not been given an increase in budget. And so the current budget is $6 million for nonprofits, while for profits, it's been $4 million. We evaluated, what percentage should be awarded to these increases so that folks have no trouble conducting the necessary activities. We came up with about a 20% increase. So the nonprofit goes from 6 million to about 7 million, and for profits go from 4 million to about 5 million, up to those numbers. And again, the rationale is that we have heard from our grantees, current and future, is that the toxicology studies have cost a lot more, especially if they're going to have to use non-human primates. Manufacturing cost has increased, and equally important, higher workers' wages costs have also increased. So with those requested or proposed budget increases, these are amounts of dollars that are within our budget, and there will be no need for us to modify the budget for 23-24. The duration of the CLIN1 will remain at 24 months, like I described in the previous slide. So with the changes regarding the CLIN2 and concept changes that we're proposing, we'd like to explain the rationale for that first. So those changes are needed because most CIRM-funded trials thus far, or in the past, have been in early stage clinical development, either phase 1 or phase 2, and this is whether it is cell therapy or gene therapy. As the field has matured and more programs are entering late stage development, and I mentioned earlier, we have a number of them that are embarking on really late stage, whether it's a phase 3 or, as discussed with the regulators, to be a pivotal or registration trial. They're moving directly into, independent again of a disease indication, towards getting that registration with, to embark on getting the product out to the patients and the product to be on the market. So the current CLIN2 program announcement is not really that clear or explicit about the support of specific late-stage development activities. We often, the review team and the therapeutics development team, discuss some of those, and we are recognizing that we need to just make what we can fund more clearly to the potential applicants. And that will ensure best practices alignment with the FDA. And as I said earlier, it harmonizes and is consistent with what you heard with the discussion regarding AWG and the roadmap that was presented. And that will allow us to be closer towards working towards access and affordability. So what are those activities? You've heard in the past that the FDA would always like to have placebo-controlled trials. And some of the grants that we are getting, and especially in areas where placebo-controlled trial is not possible, such as in rare diseases, there's a need for alternative comparator data that is acceptable to the FDA for a marketing approval decision, and that's what's intended to support the proposed interventional clinical trial, as I mentioned, where placebo or sham controls are not possible. So there are options, and we're only giving you examples here. Natural history studies. Others would be to purchase data repositories from various US repositories that actually collect such data. And they must have documented that the FDA agreement accepts those comparators while in discussions with the regulators, so there are no surprises. And so we want to make sure that that's well explained to the applicants. And then compilation of patient-reported outcomes. This is really important, especially when it comes to the folks who manage the care, like CMS, Medicaid, Medicare. And so we would like to make sure that our grantees understand that they include that as well. And that's related to the conduct of the proposed trial. And then compilation of real-world data and real-world evidence related to the conduct of the proposed trial. The FDA has put out multiple now guidance documents that says they will accept such data instead of placebo or sham controlled. And so we want to make sure we are in mainstream in collaborating closely with the FDA to allow those studies to succeed. And in addition, we always want to make sure that we support the DEI goals by any funds that are needed. And we had heard that sometimes they need more funds for that activity. And so we just would like to make sure that when they budget accordingly, knowing that's allowed. So now we move to the new CLIN4 concept plan. So what does a CLIN4 mean, and what is it for? So there are certain key activities required by the FDA to get a biologics license application. By the way, we already have one grantee that has arrived at that stage, and the FDA have accepted their biologics license application filing, and they have a PDUFA date in March of 2024. And so I just want to give you the feeling that this is really becoming a reality for CIRM. So getting readiness for product launch are not covered by the current Clean 2 PA. And invariably, based on our conversation with our grantees that are starting to get that stage, it is required to plan for readiness for product launch while the BLA is being prepared or finalizing the trial. And that takes about 1 to 2 years before they even file the BLA. So the goal of the Clean 4 is to support CIRM-funded programs to achieve a BLA filing and advancement towards the goal of obtaining a marketing approval. It is a very important thing to mention again that this is a very logical bridge to the AWG, again demonstrating CIRM's commitment to access and affordability. This is really an important kind of connectivity with the long-term goal of CIRM, making all these types of grants affordable and accessible to patients. So what does the new Clean 4 include, and who would be eligible for this grant? We decided to make sure that we don't have overlapping Clean 2 requests and Clean 4 requests. So we said they must have an active Clean 2 award, overlapping requests when I mentioned that. So it must have an active Clean 2 award, must have completed 50% of the milestones on an active Clean 2 award. So no, it gives us the feeling that they can actually do it, and they have done a good job on time within budget. Must have completed an end of phase 2 meeting or equivalent with the FDA and have concurrence on requirements for a BLA filing. And again, based on experience so far of 2 grantees who are close to that, is that will be very helpful for them. What will new Clean 4 provide? We debated whether we should make a Clean 4 a large grant, larger even than the Clean 2, and we came to the notion that up to $12 million is sufficient to cover late-stage development activities necessary for BLA filing, but not included in the Clean 2 award. And let me show you what those activities are. So those activities include filing a BLA, conducting a pre-BLA meeting with the FDA. By the way, for some of those, they may be given, essentially the FDA will not require them to pay the fees that are required for that, but most of them will need to do that. And then compilation of an electronic common technical document, which is the format by which the FDA requires. Product manufacturing activities necessary to submit a BLA. And then commercial development activities such as pharmacoeconomic analysis, budget models, budget impact models, a managed healthcare payer perspective. They have to have all those discussions ongoing while they are actually preparing for this key step. Development of a supply chain strategy, knowing how are they going to distribute the drug, where is the drug going to be delivered, what is the cost of all that. This is all has to be part of the planning. And then initiation of pre-commercialization activities, such as production of payers' cost effectiveness analysis report, which the ICIRM, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, requires. And there is a nice, good fee that goes with that. And then compilation of an AMCP dossier. The AMCP is Academy of Managed Care Pharmacy dossier. And again, we're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. And then the last item that we're allowing is a compassionate use of the investigational therapy for patients in the period after enrollment closed, and market approval is in the awarded stage or is awarded with FDA approval and agreement with the drug product supplier. And I'm happy to discuss that in more detail as necessary. So as a summary of what I just mentioned in the last few slides, I just want to highlight that we are within budget. And so the CLIN 1 increase will be from 6 million to 7 million for the nonprofit and 4 million to 5 million for the profit organizations. And the CLIN 2 will remain up to 15 million, and the CLIN 4, if approved, or if you allow it to move forward, that will be up to 12 million. So CIRM requests kindly from the Science Subcommittee to approve to move forward with the proposed CLIN 1 and CLIN 2 concept amendments, and the approval of a CLIN 4 concept to move to the ICOC for ultimate approval. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Maria Bonneville.
I don't have any questions, but what I wanted to do is thank ABLA so much. The CLIN 2, just the clarification of the activities that are allowed really dovetails so nicely with the work that the AWG did with the roadmap. And thank you, ABLA, for bringing that all together so that we can further these projects along. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maria B.
Monica Carson.
Thank you. That was a beautiful presentation and beautifully explained. In general, it sounds quite rational. I just had a quick question about the CLIN 1 awards. Since you had justified or just had put it in the context of a 20% increase, de facto, you're giving about an approximately 17% increase for nonprofits and an approximate 25% increase for the profits. There may be rationale for that, or was it better to be I was just curious about the logic of proportion.
Actually, we had a discussion with Pat Levitt, and I rounded the 7 million. It was 7.2 million to be equivalent to the for-profit. And I rounded it down instead of up, instead of going to 7.2 or 7.5. And so I'm happy to change it, whichever, but whatever we end up with, we'd like it to be consistent between those two. So thanks for bringing that up.
So your actual proposal would be more that they should both be 20%, or
correct.
Okay. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I just clarify. I was fine with either one, as long as it was rounded. Rounding up's fine. I think making it equivalent or even a little higher would be fine.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pat.
Christine.
I think you're muted, Chris.
Thank you. Albert, thanks for your presentation. One of the comments I had as I was listening to it, I wish the NIH had the wisdom to increase their budgets, which we haven't seen in a long time. But I do have two questions. In terms of the CLIN 4 program, are you planning a pre-application, like letter of intent, to screen applicants to meet the minimum criteria?
The truth, Christine, is we've been thinking about the current grantees that we have who are ready to move. And in order to have them complete, either overlap with their current CLIN 2 and get them to apply to a CLIN 4. So remember, CIRM is in the acceleration business.
Right.
And so if a new applicant comes with a CLIN 2, and let's say they do accomplish a couple of their milestones and they are ready for a CLIN 4, we'll keep an eye on them so as to encourage them to apply. Yeah, and so we actually are actively working that so that we are accommodating the grantees that have been with us for now a number of years who are reaching to that stage. And it will be a shame if we, did not allow them to get to that stage and not find any funds to allow them to get to BLA stage and be available to patients.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And it sounds like it's going to be an invitational type of process.
More like it, yeah.
The other one I was interested in one of your slides was the notion of collecting patient-reported outcomes, because I think that is incredibly important. And you made the point that that's really important for the clinicians. I'd make the point it's also really important for the patients to know what they're getting into and the family members. But the question I had was, is CIRM in any way considering standardizing some of these PROs? I know many of them have to be specific to the disease or the process that's being treated, but it would be incredibly important, I think, for us to try to get some common data elements across our studies that could be metrics for the larger field. You know, for example, quality of life. I think that should be endemic in all of the studies that we engage in. And there may be other ones, like functional outcomes, that are really, really important to patients. So I don't know if you've had discussions or are considering that. It sort of falls to me along the same lines as what we're doing with the DEI rubric, you know, in terms of being able to understand certain demographics. But I wonder if that could be something that we could have a conversation about, because I think it would serve the field broadly.
Totally agree, Christine, right on the money. In fact, we need to coordinate also that with the AWG, how we think about it, as well as create potentially, like you said, a rubric that will assist us in making sure some of the elements are going to be slightly different from disease 1 to 2 to 3. But at the same time, I think standardization will be also helpful to us. And so that's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I sit on a lot of the grant reviews, and the DEI rubric, from my perspective, is really working. And we are getting some metrics from that we'll be able to use in the future. So I would really encourage you to think about the patient-reported outcomes as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, I'll be on the list.
Abla, I have a couple of questions. One I think is probably self-evident, but I'd like to confirm my understanding that these changes would make it in principle possible to develop a therapy entirely in the non-commercial sector and with no involvement of a commercial partner.
I think maybe I can answer that, but maybe let's listen to Sham's proposal first. And then decide together. But yes, the answer is yes, because since we are eliminating the co-funding requirements in some cases, so I think that's going to be possible.
And that may be key to developing affordability, if there's no profit motive anywhere in there. Second question is about the requirement of a CLIN 2 to get a CLIN 4. I mean, what about the case where therapeutic development gets abandoned by a company or another academic institution that was supported with NIH funds or private funds? Wouldn't we still want to be able to pick it up with a CLIN 4 if it looked like a meritorious approach?
Actually, we discussed that at length. We would, you know, for example, for some indications, where we have no grants and they come up to us and ask for a CLIN 4, let's say in any of the psychiatric diseases or whatever, will we do that? I think we talked about potentially making it like an exception or like a vital research opportunity. So that, but right now we're trying to kind of move all the programs that we have, but we're going to be open with your permission and blessing that we actually entertain such a thing at some point.
When I was at Harvard, many regulations and rules were preceded by the word ordinarily. Ordinarily, a CLIN 2 would be provided, but there's always room for, you know, getting around it in some reasonable way if there's a consensus. So that might be a way to handle that.
Yes.
It's quite effective there.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let's have somebody move for approval.
So moved.
Maria, thank you.
Second.
Judy.
Judy. Okay, Judy seconded. Great. Scott, call the roll, please.
And I'll just check to see, confirm that there is no public comment. I didn't
Sorry.
see Claudette. Oh, wait. We
There
do
is
have
one hand raised.
hand raised.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So the 510 number,
They're on mute, Scott.
yep.
Hi there. Thank you very much. This is Celia Adelson with the UCLA Stem Cell Research Center. I just wanted to underscore Dr. Goldstein's comments. The same thing had occurred to me, that CIRM may want to give itself flexibility on both the active part of the CLIN2 requirement and then also the CLIN2 requirement as well. You know, I appreciate Alba's comments about this being aimed at CIRM's current portfolio, and I really understand the reason for it. But that also includes a selection bias. You don't know about the other programs that are out there that need this critical funding that you envision. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Abla, anything that you'd like to respond there? You don't necessarily have to.
I agree with the potential concept of what she mentioned, and happy to entertain, you know, potential. Like we said, we thought it would be important for folks to know what a CLIN4 is all about, but at the same time, for us to entertain potential, eligibility at some point. But right now, we're needing it for the current portfolio, and I understand it could be some bias, but at the same time, I think we commend anyone who has a program that's reached that stage and would like to apply to CIRM, that we will discuss it with this committee and come back to them.
And I don't see any.
Larry, you're on mute.
Any other public comment?
Doesn't look like it. Can you confirm that, Claudette?
No other comments.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. So go ahead, Scott. Call the roll.
Haifa Abdulhaq,
Yes.
Maria Bonneville,
Yes.
Monica Carson,
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed,
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbury, sorry, Mark.
Yes.
Thank you. Elena Flowers,
Yes.
Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein,
Yes.
David Higgins,
Yes.
Vito Bassiani,
Yes.
Pat Levitt,
Yes.
and Chris Miaskowski.
Yes.
Great, thanks very much. The motion carries.
Okay. Next up are some proposed changes to co-funding requirements from industry. Sham, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can hear and see my slides okay. So this is a continuation of a set of co-funding changes that were initially proposed by the IP Industry Subcommittee. And so I'm going to describe those to you today. And thank you for your time. So this initially started off as a request from the IP Industry Subcommittee to evaluate whether our co-funding requirements for for-profit entities are limiting their ability to access CIRM funding and to progress their projects with the use of CIRM funds. And so what we have done is we took that and took a holistic approach to all the co-funding requirements. And what we're proposing to you is a culmination of all that activity in close guidance with the IP subcommittee, particularly Dr. Abu Salam, as well as Chairman Jules Gard. And so it going to address several different co-funding elements, and I'll describe those to you in the next few slides. So first, to kind of start off, I want to describe what our current co-funding requirements are. And as part of this exercise, we went back and reevaluated the intent of the co-funding requirements when the clinical program was first being proposed as a concept plan This was back in 2014, 2015 timeframe. So since then, the co-funding requirements have stayed largely the same with minor changes here and there, but this is what they are at the moment. So for a nonprofit entity that applies to CIRM for funding, they have no co-funding requirement up until the point of a CLIN 2 submission that is post a first-in-human clinical trial. On the other side, for a for-profit entity, the co-funding requirement escalates from TRAN to CLIN 1 to CLIN 2. And I'll get into the reasons for why these co-funding requirements are there. But I do want to note the way the co-funding is calculated is that it's the total project cost of that particular stage of activity, the CIRM funding amount, plus the commitment from the awardee. That's how it's calculated. So what was the intent of these co-funding requirements when they were first proposed as part of the initial CLIN 2 concept plan? For the for-profits, it was to demonstrate that they have a commitment to the proposed project, that they are committed to it in the current stage, and they're committed to progressing that project forward, and that it is a priority for them in their pipeline. For the nonprofits, there is that 40% co-funding requirement that I mentioned for later stage clinical trials, and that was intended to promote an industry partner for those late stage clinical trials, because you would need, in the current traditional sort of approval model, that you would need a partner to take on that project for late stage development and commercialization. So having that co-fund, if it's a nonprofit that's sponsoring that trial, that they have a partner in place to take that project forward as it progresses. So these are going to be important. The intent is going to be important as I describe the changes in the next few slides. So this slide is going to outline why we're proposing the changes to the co-funding requirements, and then it's going to describe the co-funding requirements themselves. So first, I want to start off by why are we proposing changes? So first of all, with respect to the clinical, the nonprofits. So currently, for unpartnered academic programs that have promising first-in-human data, the requirement to have 40% co-funding for that next stage clinical trial is actually stalling progress of those programs, because they have to find some way to secure that funding. This is particularly relevant for programs that are in the rare disease space, or ones that currently don't have as much commercial potential. And I think we all know of many of those programs. And there are several programs in our own portfolio that have experienced this slowing or stalling while they try to figure out other mechanisms to fund them. So that's the first part. The second part is that the way our current co-funding requirements are described, if a nonprofit applicant already has a for-profit partner, that for-profit partner is not required to co-fund the CIRM award, because the current co-funding requirements apply to the applicant and subsequently the awardee, and not to any partners. And lastly, which was the original intent of these changes from the IP subcommittee, was that for-profits are operating in a very challenging economic environment. This has been ongoing for a few years now. And they're at and on top of that, they are at a disadvantage, relatively speaking, to nonprofits for CIRM award levels. You saw that in the previous presentation, there's lower award amounts for CLIN 1, as well as for first-in-human clinical trials. And also, unlike nonprofits, for-profits cannot request CIRM funding for indirect costs. They can request funding for direct facilities costs, but not indirect costs, which for a nonprofit is 20%. So with those three things in mind, we're proposing the following table of changes, and I will go through them one step at a time. So first and foremost, we differentiated the nonprofit applicants to CIRM into two categories. The first is that a nonprofit applicant that does not have a for-profit partner with a vested interest in commercializing that project. For those entities, there will be no co-funding requirement under this proposal at any stage of a CIRM award. Discovery, translation, clinical, CLIN 2, post-first-in-human, and this would also, I believe, extend to CLIN 4 as well. On the flip side now, with respect to the for-profit elements that are involved there, so for a for-profit applicant, or where you have a nonprofit applicant that has an established for-profit partner that has a vested interest in commercializing that project, the for-profit would be subject to either the cash co-funding requirement or would have the option for a warrant-based co-funding requirement. And I'll describe what this means. Essentially, what it is a flexibility to either commit cash to CIRM or to commit warrants to CIRM. And that was the original proposal from the IP Regenerative Subcommittee, was to create this warrant-based co-funding requirement as an alternative to the cash-based co-funding requirement for companies that apply to CIRM. So I'm going to quickly address the nonprofit side, and then the rest of the presentation is going to focus on what that warrant-based co-funding requirement looks like and how we designed it. So first and foremost, as I iterated previously, that 40% co-funding requirement is not active as an incentive for industry partners. This is not incentivizing industry partner to partner with any of the nonprofit programs that are at that stage by itself. And what it instead is doing is slowing clinical progress while those awardees or those applicants that have promising first-in-human clinical data want to progress that project in a nonprofit setting, have to find other sources of funding like NIH, foundation, and so on. And as you've already noted, the NIH funding is often not sufficient for these types of activities at that late stage of development. Now, on the flip side, if that nonprofit already has a partner, the co-funding requirement would apply, as stated in the previous slide, to the for-profit partner. And I do want to quickly reiterate that these CLIN 2 awards that would be going to the nonprofits without a co-funding requirement would still have our revenue sharing requirement and our loan conversion requirements attached to them, as all our awards do. So just want to quickly outline that in the instance of a $15 million CLIN 2 award to a nonprofit for a phase 2 or later trial, if that data is used for regulatory filing, they would be subject to a 1.5, the commercializing entity, whoever that may be, would be subject to a 1.5% royalty on that revenue. This could be up to $135 million or 10 years. That is our standard revenue sharing requirement attached to all of our awards. Alternatively, if the awardee or its partner decides to convert that award to a loan after it has ended, CIRM would at a minimum have a return of the principal amount, 15 million, and potentially more depending on what stage they elect. So these sort of return to the state and to CIRM is still preserved, even if we remove the co-funding requirement, because those are separate instances. So the rest of this presentation is going to focus on the warrants, and I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. So I appreciate if you'll hang with me for a little bit here. So the warrant-based co-funding requirement. So how does this work? So a for-profit awardee would commit warrants. These are the right to purchase equity in a company instead of capital. And I'll describe the warrants in the next few slides. The awardee would retain capital for operational needs and value creation in this instance by not having to commit that co-funding amount. And in order to make all this work, what we had to do was that we had to create this mechanism, and it applies in certain instances where the CIRM would actually commit a higher award amount up to the award cap to maintain overall financial support of the CIRM funded project. Because as I mentioned previously, the co-funding plus CIRM funding is in totality addressing the total project cost. If we remove the co-funding requirement, there would still be a cash gap for those projects. And so in some instances where the CIRM award can fill that gap is where the warrant-based mechanism makes the most sense. And you can see that in the chart in this particular table. So first of all, to walk you through an example really quickly, let's take, for instance, a translational 1 project that has a total project cost of $4 million. So the activities to get to a pre-IND meeting cost $4 million in this instance. The CIRM award limit for this is $4 million. So at the moment, a for-profit applicant could at most request $3.2 million and would have to put up $800,000 of its own money to co-fund that project. Under the warrant-based co-funding requirement, this particular situation, the applicant can choose to take the warrant-based co-funding instead of the cash-based. In that instance, the CIRM award they could request is up to $4 million. And because $800,000 of that would have been attributed to the co-funding amount, that is the amount of warrant coverage that they'd have to give to CIRM. And I'll describe what that means in the next slide. Now, as I mentioned, there's a constraint here of the award cap, and that's described in the next row. So in instances where the project cost is significantly higher than the CIRM award cap, the warrant-based co-funding is actually not going to be that useful, if at all. So in this instance, let's say we have a $5 million total project cost, and the CIRM award amount is $4 million. In this instance, they've already hit the cap of $4 million and have to put up $1 million of their own money to address the total project costs. So the warrant-based co-funding requirement is not going to be helpful because that $1 million cash gap still exists. And in that instance, the awardee would benefit from just taking the cash-based co-funding requirement instead of the warrant-based. The last row I'm going to skip, but it just describes the same situation, but for a CLIN 2 award where the warrant-based co-funding requirement, how that would apply to that. So why warrants? And so CIRM has a history with warrants in the past. So the prior loan program that CIRM had launched, and there were several loans that were given out, had warrants attached to it. Similarly, there was a ATP3 program that would have also had warrants attached to that. So what are warrants? So warrants basically are issued by the company to the holder. And this gives the holder the right to purchase shares of company stock. And the warrants are exercised by the holder at a set exercise price within a set amount of time to convert those warrants to shares of company stock. And so previously how this played out was that as part of the loan program, a company had issued warrants to CIRM, and CIRM had held the warrants until it made a decision to exercise them. When it exercised the warrants, it assigned the stock shares to a CIRM fund that was held at the San Francisco Foundation. This is essentially an account to aggregate and hold CIRM assets. And the foundation was then instructed to liquidate the shares, basically sell the stock shares in the market, and then transfer the proceeds from the fund back to CIRM. So this was something that was done in the past and served as a precedent for this particular mechanism going forward. So three things to outline here: the CIRM, the warrants are issued to CIRM, and CIRM holds those warrants. Then CIRM exercises those warrants to convert the warrants into shares of company stock, which are held by the fund at the San Francisco Foundation. And then they're instructed to liquidate the shares and transfer money back to CIRM. That was a previous instance of how this worked. So under the current warrant-based co-funding requirement proposal, the applicant would elect the warrant-based co-funding requirement at the time of the application. They would have various sources of information to inform this decision, including a term sheet, an FAQ, and other reference materials. And the applicant may combine warrant-based and cash-based co-funding, which under certain circumstances could make sense. The warrants must be issued at award start, and that is a requirement for us because CIRM is committing its money upfront. And there will be no mechanism for buying back the warrants. So the awardee will not have a mechanism to buy back the warrants at any period, either during the award or after the award. CIRM will hold those warrants until it's decision to do something with it. So in designing this, we had to create a set of terms that would derive enough value for CIRM for what is in essence putting up additional funding up to the award cap, and at the same time being fair to the awardees. And lastly, to make sure that all the awardees can issue those warrants at the award start. So this table describes all of that, and I'm only going to outline a few of these points and I can go into more detail in the next one. So one thing that is consistent in the economics of the warrant is that the exercise price is 1 cent. So this means that it's going to be a nominal cost to CIRM to exercise those warrants. And that really is key to making sure that the warrants, the value of these warrants is similar to the value of the investment going into that company at that stage. The warrant term is going to be 10 years. So we have 10 years to decide what to do with those warrants. And then in order to enable all of the different types of companies that apply to CIRM to be able to issue warrants at award start, we're varying the security type as well as the number of shares to those specific companies. So very early stage companies would give us common stock warrants at a set formula, but we reserve the right to convert those to a different sort of warrant under preferred stock at the next financing. And this is fairly common for those early stage companies when they're getting investors putting in money as well to kind of determine the valuation when there is an activity down the road from an institutional investor. On the private and public company side, these are going to be preferred stock or common stock, which is the exact same type of equity that those investors are getting at that stage of company. And there's no optionality to convert for these because we're already getting the same values what the investor is getting at that stage. So lastly, I want to touch on what are the eligibility requirements for companies applying to CIRM and what are additional requirements that may apply to the warrant-based mechanism. And so at the moment, any for-profit applicant that applies to CIRM has to demonstrate that it has at least 6 months of cash to maintain solvency from the application submission date. And it also must demonstrate to CIRM at the time of application that it has the ability to commit to co-funding as well as contingency funding. So how is it going to bring in the money to co-fund the project and to have funds set aside for contingencies? So all of that is required at the application stage. During the course of the award, the awardee that has a co-funding requirement is required to indicate the amount of money spent on co-funding and also to demonstrate that it has the ability to co-fund that next milestone. There's continuous checks that happen over the course of the award. So the warrant-based co-funding option creates a couple of additional requirements on the eligibility side and on the award reporting side that I'm going to quickly outline here. So firstly, for the very, very early stage companies that haven't had any institutional funding, they would be required to provide us their fundraising plan at the time they apply to CIRM. For the private companies that have had institutional financing, basically venture capital or biopharma partnering, they would have to tell us their fundraising history to date. And we also want to see from their investor that they support this CIRM project. There would be no award period reporting requirements for the later stage companies. But for the very early stage companies, they would have to tell us if there's a financing event that allows us to exercise our option to convert the warrants, as I previously mentioned, from common stock to preferred stock. And lastly, we'll also utilize our industry alliance program to help these companies where needed in their fundraising plans. So the last slide of this presentation, I want to outline how we're going to manage this portfolio of warrants if this mechanism is approved by the Science Subcommittee and the ICOC. So first and foremost, there's going to be the issuance of the warrants, and there's ongoing routine compliance monitoring. And this is going to be managed by the CIRM team with support from our outside counsel. Secondly, as I outlined previously, there's 2 ways that these warrants can create value for CIRM. The first is that we can sell the warrants. And secondly, is probably the more likely one, is that we exercise these warrants at an appropriate event. So this is going to be managed by the CIRM team, and it's going to be facilitated by the CIRM fund at a California Community Foundation. This is a similar process to what I previously described that happened the last time that CIRM had warrants. So the way this would work is that the awardee has issued warrants to CIRM at award start. CIRM holds the warrants until it decides to exercise them or until certain automatic exercises are triggered. So particularly in the case of the company having a change in control, it gets acquired or it merges or it goes public. So it issues issues an IPO or that the warrant is expiring. In those instances, the warrants will be exercised and the company stock shares are going to be assigned to the CIRM account held at the California Community Foundation. And then from CIRM's instructions, the Community Foundation will sell those shares of stock and then will transfer the cash proceeds back to CIRM. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Mark.
Yeah, I have several questions. First of all, I very much applaud the need and desire to figure out modifications to be able to provide funding in critical junctures for company in general. And second, with the backdrop of the very complicated and extremely difficult financing environment, broadly speaking, in biotech, that makes a lot of sense. So I applaud the initiative. I have a whole slew of questions around, how the warrants can actually, help to affect that. Because as you're quite familiar, warrants that go with loans, the loan offering is the predominant financial mechanism for protection from downside has quite a few clauses associated with that for protection, including repayment provisions and a whole host of other protection elements. And then if warrants are given in also as a sweetener around preferred stock has a whole bunch of bells and whistles and valuation levels and other features that really sweeten the pot, if you will, and warrants are sort of a nice overlay or gravy on top of that. And if we're in a situation of we're only doing warrants, then it's actually pretty easy to have that value of those warrants washed out. So I'm not sure how we're going to deal with that particular issue. The other situation is I noted that whereas there's a bullet point for potential conversion of warrants in the preferred stock, obviously as listed later in the presentation, there's a comment around warrants getting switched to common stock. There's radical differences, as you're familiar with what that means in terms of returns. So my sense is there's a whole list of questions here that I think we need to get additional experts in, funding areas to make sure that we've got this, buttoned up. But that's kind of where I'm leaning to. But I wanted to get your feedback and comments on that to see if I'm missing something.
Thank you, Mark. So this was vetted by the IP Subcommittee as the proposal as a whole. In terms of the warrant terms, these were developed in conjunction with outside counsel. We've got accounting implications, feedback from EY, Ernst & Young, as well as tax implications from our outside counsel as they apply to the companies. Now, in terms of the protections for CIRM, I do want to note that our grants as a whole are at-risk investments in these companies. So those amounts are at risk anyway. With respect to, we did consider whether it would be more appropriate to create a loan mechanism as opposed to a warrant mechanism for that waived co-funding requirement. So instead of them getting that as an award, that proportion of the co-funding as a loan. And there are a lot of reasons why that probably will not be that beneficial to the companies, particularly because a previous loan program that CIRM had was in and of itself not attractive to companies because the terms that were associated with that. And so it was not utilized that highly by the company. So here the intent was to create a mechanism that would be fair, provide a return to CIRM, but also be something that would help the companies be able to secure CIRM funding and to progress those projects that they're developing. With respect to the common and preferred shares, so just to clarify, for the really early stage companies that have not had a preferred stock issuance at the time they apply to CIRM, we needed to create a mechanism that would allow them to issue warrants to CIRM at the start of the award. And so those are going to be common stock warrants to CIRM along that pricing formula. Now, in the event when that company does secure preferred share financing, CIRM has the option, if the economics are better for us, to convert from that common stock warrant to the preferred stock warrant based on the pricing of the preferred shares. Now, so then we would have the option to do that. In the end, when these warrants are exercised, and eventually, if there is an event that is going to be either a liquidating event or an IPO, you're correct that the preferred shares are going to be converted, and there's a conversion preference there. And so the conversion preference would apply for the private companies, and in the instances where we had taken those common stock warrants and converted to preferred shares. So there will be a determination whether it makes sense for us to convert for those really early stage companies from a common stock warrant to preferred stock warrant.
Yeah, thank you for those clarifications. And obviously, I think you've done a good job on getting the homework done related to legal and accounting and tax implications. Have you had an opportunity to talk to people who are doing current rounds of funding to understand the parameters and valuation perspectives and you know, there's quite a few different elements here. And again, warrants are typically a sweetener on a transaction as opposed to a primary funding mechanism. So have we talked to folks who've been doing deals and walking through the issues and opportunities associated with that?
Yes. So we sought feedback from our, so on the point of the demand, we sought feedback from our awardees, as well as we've sought feedback from our investment partners on the Industry Alliance programs. These are VC venture capital funds that we work with. And in those instances, you know, we outline the terms. And one of the things that is mentioned, that is provided in there, is that these are pre-funded warrants. So these are going to be, and that's the exercise price of a penny. So that's where the value really comes from, is that we're not paying additional to exercise these warrants when it comes time to do that. And those were things that we discussed, as well as the preferred share warrants for those private companies. And both of those, the feedback from the investors, that seems appropriate given the sort of value that we're providing to the company at that stage.
And did they come up with the fact that companies need to, on some of these, value the warrants at 409A valuation levels that come up in the discussion? Because a lot of times they cannot preset that. If it's a preferred warrant, for example, it can't preset that at a penny.
Yeah, so we did walk through that with the with our both Ernst & Young on the accounting side, as well as with the outside counsel on the legal side, as to what those implications would be for the companies. And they have several options to account for that. And it was not going to be from our perspective, a major concern for those companies to be able to do that.
Satisfied, Mark?
Okay, I think there's still have some questions, but I'll let other people jump in.
Great. Shlomo.
Yeah, thank you. I think that Shlomo, you outlined this very, very elegantly. Thank you. It's clear that the warrant option really allows CIRM to enjoy the benefits if the product is successful. But the concern I think that we would have as a public agency representing the citizens is, are we in fact diminishing the risk which the for-profit is taking? And the element of risk is really the driver of the for-profit world. And by removing that element of risk, are we in fact doing ourselves a disservice as a public agency when we expect the for-profits to assume some degree of risk?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So I'll speak from my own experience being in a startup in the past and running that. So there are risks for any project that for a small company, the types of companies that apply to CIRM are taking on. So here there's a few. First of all, is that all of the overhead costs for that project, the indirect costs, are being borne by the company because we're not paying for those. Secondly, there is the risk of opportunity costs, right, to this project. They're committing their resources, their personnel, their time to this project, right?
But they're not. Now we're not. Now we're telling them that they don't have to commit.
Sorry?
We're telling them that they don't have to commit. They're only committing warrants.
They're committing warrants, but the opportunity costs come from the fact that, you know, these companies have limited staff, they have limited resources, and they're committing those to the project, right, as opposed to any other project. So they are putting their own skin in the game for the project because they could be supporting some other project, right? And so that opportunity cost does exist with the limited set of personnel, resources, and abilities that they have as a small company.
Okay, I think it's very important that we articulate very clearly, maybe even in a separate paragraph, that we do expect the companies to assume risk, and risk will be assumed by, and delineate what you just said now in your answer, because that's going to be a concern by the public. Thank you. I can't quantify. I'm not an expert in quantifying risk. But I hope that what you said will be sufficient to satisfy the people who understand risk.
Vito.
Thank you. Comment and a question. First of all, I'm going to compliment Sean. That was brilliant presentation. Very complicated subject. You did a great job and you presented it with a lot of clarity. So this is a question. Maybe it goes to the lawyer. I'm not sure. It goes back to Law School 101 and torts. I'm just curious about the legal basis for our claim through a warrant. Are all CIRM grants contracts and they have the force of contract?
Yes.
So it's not just a congratulations, here you are. They actually sign a contract with us.
Correct.
Okay. And that gives us the legal claim if it ever comes to that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Other questions from the committee? Public comment. Oops, sorry, Shlomo.
Yeah, a question we asked, I think, a couple of meetings ago in a different context. Who's going to make the decision on selling the warrants? Or is it going to be this board or the foundation? Are we going to make that decision? And how will we know that it's time to sell? Who's going to make the business decision?
So there's a couple elements to that. First is exercising the warrants that converts it into the company shares of stock. And so that would be a CIRM executive decision to do that. So
when you say executive, you mean a board decision or a staff decision?
Staff decision to do that. And so that would come down, particularly would apply if we have public company warrants. For the private companies, most of the time, the exercise of those warrants would be triggered by a change in the company, either through a change in control or an IPO. And so that's the first part, the exercise of the warrants into company shares of stock. Then the shares of stock are assigned to the CIRM fund. Those shares are going to be sold by the foundation, but those are going to be dictated by the instructions from CIRM.
When you say from CIRM, from the board or from the staff?
Again, they would be from the staff. And
I think the decision to sell a public share should be a board decision. I'm not sure that it should be a staff decision. And I turn to our lawyers. I'm not. If we have fiduciary responsibility, I'm not sure that we should be assigning staff the decision on selling or buying stock.
Shlomo, I think from a practical standpoint, in the past, the board has given the CEO the authority to make this decision. From a practical standpoint, it takes 10 days to get everybody on a call to then coordinate a decision about, exercising or selling stock, which could change things very drastically within 10 days. So in the past, the board has given the authority to the CEO to make that decision and work with the internal team, the lawyers and business development and other folks to be able to move forward in that direction. That's how it's worked in the past. If there's a decision that's changed, that's fine. But I just wanted to give you some context.
Well, the question is whether the board is comfortable in abrogating that obligation. I mean, it could be tens of millions of dollars in that decision for CIRM or more. It could be hundreds of millions. I don't know whether we as a board who have fiduciary responsibility for CIRM can abrogate that amount of responsibility. I think that's a legal question. And also a moral question.
From a legal standpoint, it could go either way. So that's a decision that the board needs to make, is whether or not they want to have that on, as part of the way it works, or if they want to, again, give the CEO the authority to do it. So I defer to the board on that matter.
Thank you.
Can I just insert a related question here, and then we'll go to Mark? Ordinarily, if some employee of the company or investor takes stock options, they're prohibited from selling those options for several months post IPO. Would we have that restriction, or would we be able to sell at the moment of the IPO if the stock price is sufficiently high?
It depends on the IPO terms and how that might apply to other holders of stock.
Mark?
Yeah, just Larry, with respect to that, that's usually arranged by the investment banks at the time of the IPO. And what happens is they will request a prohibition on sale for at least 6 months post IPO, and they'll certainly request that. So just FYI. But hey, just a quick question on walking through the warrant coverage. If we go to the example of what I think there was a reference on one of the charts for $2.4 million in warrants. Could you just walk me through how we're thinking about what that 2.4 million is in terms of share conversion? I wasn't really tracking, how that gets calculated. What does that mean in terms of number of shares?
Yeah, good point. So the way we're doing that, and I'll describe it for all three instances of the different companies. So if we're trying to get coverage for 2.4 million, I'm going to keep it simple. Let's say $1 million just to keep the math simple so I don't mess it up.
Sure.
So for $1 million, let's take the example first of a public company. For the public company, what we need to figure out is how many shares we're going to get for that $1 million. And what we're using is the market price of their common stock. So it's going to be an average closing price over the last 10 days. And based on that, we would take the amount of CIRM funding that can be attributed to co-funding, so that's $1 million, divided by the share price to give us a number of shares that would be the warrants. For the private company that has had an institutional financing round, we will take the preferred stock price of the most recent round. And so that would be the calculation for the denominator of that equation that I previously mentioned. For the very early stage companies that have not had a preferred share financing to date, we will, in instances where possible, use a formula of a $1 of CIRM co-funding divided by $1 of common stock to get to that particular formula. But we do reserve the right to make modifications to that formula based on the cap structure of that company. Now, when that would convert to a preferred stock warrant, that would be the price of the preferred stock share. So in that instance, when we have that optionality to go from that common stock warrant to the preferred stock warrant, we would be looking at what is the additional shares that CIRM would be getting, as well as whether it's more preferable to have preferred stock or common stock warrants at that time. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful in terms of the math. Just one big caveat. A lot of companies today, whatever they did on their last round of funding, Series A or Series B, are often seeing dramatically lower values if they were trying to be in the market today. So there would be, that would be an extremely, generous amount related to that conversion calculation.
Noted. We did think about other ways in terms of using 498 valuations and whatnot, but this was meant to be a more consistent way across all of the awardees.
Okay, if there are no further questions, public comments, please.
I'm not seeing any. Larry, Claudette?
Confirming there are no hands raised.
Okay.
Great. Would somebody like to move approval to recommend to the ICOC that they consider this?
So moved.
There we go.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Scott, please call the roll.
Haifa Abdul Haq,
Yes.
Ria Bonneville,
Yes.
Monica Carson,
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed,
Yes.
Mark Fisher Colbury,
No.
Elena Flowers,
Can I abstain?
sure. Judy Gasson,
Yes.
Larry Goldstein? Sorry, Larry, are you on mute?
Yes, and yes.
Thank you. David Higgins?
Yes.
Vito Bassiani? Vito, I believe maybe you're muted.
I'm sorry, that was a yes.
Thank you. Pat Levitt?
Yes.
Chris Miaskowski?
Yes.
Great, thanks very much, Larry. The motion carries.
Okay, final proposal in front of us today comes from Jeff Lomax regarding the community care centers and a concept plan.
Thank you, chairs. Jeff Lomax representing the Medical Affairs and Policy team. I'm going to, being a little bit sensitive to time, try to move through this faster than I would, but feel free to stop me if you have questions. So I'm going to describe the Community Care Centers of Excellence concept plan, and as a reminder for completeness, you do have a memo and a draft plan noticed as part of this meeting, so we have a complete record. A reminder, this is a plan that's been under development since the later part of 2022. We had a needs assessment phase that included a series of listening sessions and a statewide public workshop. And in addition to those meetings, we were having ongoing consultation with the Access and Affordability Working Group, who were also providing feedback and recommendations to the needs assessment process as we were moving through that phase. And as a reminder, the memo describing this item includes a link to items, sort of the documentation that we created as part of that needs assessment phase. And that really served to inform the draft concept, which you now have before you. It was presented to the Access and Affordability Working Group about 3 weeks ago, and we have incorporated some additional feedback from them, and I'll summarize that for you today. The aim would be to move this, the concept plan to the board at the next December board meeting so we could enter the application phase early next year. Also want to remind you, the Community Care Centers of Excellence are an infrastructure program. They're described in Proposition 14 as a infrastructure hub for expanding access to clinical trials and regenerative medicine treatments, in addition to CIRM education and training programs. And I just want to, it's not in the slide, but I did want to remind you of the language in Proposition 14, which includes by establishing geographically diverse centers of excellence to conduct clinical trials and to seek to make the resulting treatments and cures broadly available to California patients. So that's the mandate vis-a-vis the proposition. One of the sort of common questions we had along the process, what do these centers look like? These centers, often when you say community care centers, I think one envisions buildings. They're really people. This is from our clinics meeting, and really what we're supporting are teams to go out and support the clinical research and the subsequent treatment of patients. And so what do these teams look like? This is a sort of a typical team at a center that would be treating patients. As we are aware, cell and gene therapy clinical research has a range of very specialized needs, starting with working directly with the sponsor, educating and navigating the patient, considering issues related to coverage analysis and the financing of the trial, the management of products, which could be quite unique and include manufacturing, and then of course the data management. So if one were to look at what these teams look like, there are individuals that manage patient registries so we can identify patients and develop those cohorts. The research nurses are specialized and have a specialized set of skills because this involves not just bedside manner, but data collection. The laboratory and pharmacy piece may include again, potentially the manufacturing of products, but the handling may be quite specialized. Patient navigators who can explain and help consent those patients, and then the research coordinators and the clinicians. So this is sort of the profile of an Alpha Clinic team, and imagine that for some of these centers, such teams would be substantially similar. Moving to sort of how we envision this fitting into the broad set of CIRM infrastructure. We've, in this graphic here, we really want to sort of create the idea that we've got the patients in the middle of a wraparound support network that, again, includes our Alpha Clinics network, which at this time we includes 10 medical centers, 9 awards. The vast majority of CIRM-funded clinical trials, which is 96 to date, are supported within that network. So these are the active and ongoing elements of our clinical trials programs that are ripe for further expansion and partnership. The first stage of that expansion will be early next year as we anticipate the rollout of the patient support program. As a reminder, that program aims to complement the charge in Proposition 14 on the access side, specifically to improve or to address financial and logistical barriers related to participation in trials. So helping patients identify trials, getting them connected to clinical sites, and for certain patients that would be eligible, supporting the costs they might incur, particularly out-of-pocket costs, to participate in those trials. And the final piece are the community care centers. And what you have before you today is the draft concept plan for that program. Maybe to sort of bring this into a flow diagram, and again, this is as we went through the needs assessment and had discussions out in the community, is that we envision, and the plan's designed to accommodate this, the concept plan is that there'd be the capacity to perform community-centered engagement. So the patient would be able to interact within their community to understand or learn about these trials and potentially get connected to a community care center, which would then have the ability to navigate the patient to, in this particular scenario, to an Alpha Clinic where patient treatment could occur. And then ideally, that a majority of the follow-up and hopefully even the pre-treatment clinical activity could occur in a community setting if the patient was lived distant from an Alpha Clinic. And again, the patient support program really establishes as an overlay there to provide additional support to the patient. I think, we just earlier on, I think the discussion of patient-reported outcomes was really exciting. And I think in terms of, that was a topic within the needs assessment, from the Access and Affordability Working Group, the idea that we do need robust patient-reported outcomes, not just in terms of clinical efficacy, but those outcomes can also drive the ability to reimburse these products, because on the reimbursement side, that evidence is also critical. We could really see the community care centers performing a very unique role in terms of developing robust data in that context. So just to connect it up to prior discussions. So let me now jump into a couple of the key aspects of the concept plan itself. This is now in terms of eligibility. I want to sort of focus on sort of a 3-part test in terms of the applicant being eligible, a 3-part test on the clinical side. Part 1 would be the capacity to support human subjects protocols in a health research context. And just to be clear, human subjects equals IRB oversight. It's that fundamental regulatory framework that CIRM expects to exist in any research we're conducting that involves interactions with people. In addition, the center would have to have the capacity or be in the process of developing the capacity to support clinical research protocols involving cell, gene, or regenerative medicine treatments. And finally, we want to have some protections in there. We do not want to be funding sites that would be administering unauthorized stem cell treatments. And I'll touch on in a later slide sort of how more specifically how we've tried to address that. This program, you'd also have to have a capacity to support career development activities. That's education, training of physicians, nurses, research coordinators, community health workers, or other health professionals. We're focusing on career development as we view these sites as an excellent locations for placing CIRM trainees that have already participated in CIRM programs or are participating in CIRM programs. And again, I'll touch on that in the following slide. And in this case, we're also looking for a third part, that they've got a track record of conducting or coordinating with community-based organizations to conduct health education activities in the community. And again, this is something that, based on the needs assessment and interactions we've had with centers that participate in the needs assessment, these are fairly common activities, and the aim of this program would be to further resource those activities towards the aims of the CIRM mission. So I'm going to now sort of describe how we then support those activities, so sort of break them out. There's a little bit of nuance here. First of all, in terms of clinical operations, what we've learned is there are a number of sites within California that are clearly capable of supporting regenerative medicine clinical trials. And by supporting, they are engaging patients, they are educating patients, and they are both doing pre-screening and following up with patients in clinical trials. But the actual investigational product, that intervention is occurring at a partner site. And so that's a model that already exists. And there are a number of sites that we interacted with that appear very interested in developing that model of support, but don't view themselves as necessarily aiming to manage the actual investigational product. The other side of that coin is there are sites out there that are really on the cusp of being able to deliver these products. And so what we've tried to do on the proposal on the clinical side is to have two funding opportunities, one for a support site and one for a support and delivery site. The idea on the delivery site is that over the award period, they would then develop the capacity to manage those investigational products. In terms of career development, again, the aim here is to adapt, apply, or otherwise utilize CIRM education and training resources, that they would serve as a placement sites for scholars and trainees, and they would really integrate regenerative medicine into other navigation and community health worker certification programs. These are important programs because they're eligible for, it allows us to tap into an existing workforce that is already has a robust touch point with patients, and these activities are also reimbursed through various health financing mechanisms. So we view it as an excellent opportunity to utilize in this program. One of the things I just want to point out, and because this will be at the board meeting, because one of the questions that came up is, how will we connect, it seems challenging, how will we connect CIRM applicants to a lot of these CIRM education programs. And at the board meeting, there's going to be a presentation from the discovery team in terms of a very robust system they're developing around education portals and a whole system to consolidate and connect people up with our education programs. So this piece is intended to really dovetail with that work. And again, you'll hear more about it in the December board meeting. And finally, there will be specified budget items for a budget commitment for outreach and engagement and partnerships with community-based organizations. That's what we're proposing there. going to just do a quick compare and contrast because again, these are questions we got from some of the other working groups. Comparing on the clinical side, the eligibility for an alpha clinic was that they were already had the demonstrated capacity to handle Clin 2 programs and really manage and deliver and treat patients with investigational products. For a community care center, at a minimum, they need to be able to support those trials. And again, certain centers are in the process or would like to be in the process of developing the capacity to conduct those trials as well. So we have an opportunity for both those contingencies. Alpha clinics have really created a number of very effective training programs for everything from clinical fellows to research coordinators to nurse training. In the context of the community care centers, we really aim to apply those programs, but they're either and also serve as a placement site for those trainees. And then again, the alpha clinics do have strong engagement and navigation capacities. Their CTSAs are often being leveraged to meet with patients. In terms of the community care centers, we would obviously want to replicate those activities, but also allow them to move down to through more community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, a set of organizations that have a richer, deeper touch point with the community. And really that comes down to the rationale there is one of the term we heard most frequently in terms of the needs assessment was trust, and that in order to develop those sort of trust building scenarios, there needs to be a broader reach than we currently have with our existing clinical platforms. A couple of considerations, and I flagged these because again, they were either raised by other working groups and they come up as questions already, so I want to sort of cover them for your benefit. In terms of ethics policy, again, how do we know we get the ethics right was really the question here. And again, we're starting with the context that applicants must have experience implementing human subjects protocols, that they're formally in the formal human subjects protection program is in place, or they've had experience implementing such programs, which would include institutional review boards. As I noted earlier, unauthorized stem cell treatments, we have the benefit of a California law that requires notification of anyone receiving a treatment from a provider. If that treatment is described as a stem cell therapy and has not been authorized by the Food and Drug Administration, then a notification must be provided. If the site is providing treatments that require that notification, they would not be eligible to apply for this program. And then finally, in terms of research ethics training, we've had a lot of discussion with groups that have developed community engagement programs in support of, say, rare disease and clinical trials. And what we've learned there is there's a number of ethics training programs that have been adapted to train those individuals performing that type of engagement on the research ethics framework and get them actually certified, have them get certifications around that would be equivalent to, say, someone doing patient recruitment or patient enrollment in a clinical trial. So to really we provide the support within this program to have those people trained up so everyone's operating at a base level in terms of research ethics. And then some additional program considerations. I alluded to this earlier, just to be a bit more specific. We try to identify ways we can build sustainability into these programs. And again, I mentioned community health workers certification programs, and now there are patient navigation certification programs. Those certifications are very important because there are now mechanisms, either state or national, programs that allow for the reimbursement of those services. So we view this program as an opportunity to create a regenerative medicine module that could then be applied in these certification programs and go on to support the ongoing, this work on an ongoing basis, independent of CIRM funding, because it would become reimbursable. I noted again that this is the coordination with the CIRM education programs. I won't say a lot here, but that as I indicated, there'll be substantial background at the December meeting. And I think still another challenge, and this came from the Access and Affordability Working Group. I think the quote is, for many of our trials, we're still looking for a needle in a haystack in terms of some of these more rare disease indications. So we have begun to interact with groups that have successfully worked with rare disease cohorts and disease advocacy groups. And the plan would be moving forward once we issue the application to hold a series of webinars to connect applicants to these groups to consider ways they can partner and collaborate to reach the patient populations of interest. So finally, I will get to the numbers. We're requesting a budget allocation of 60.2 million. And the budget is designed to support, again, the core operations, which I described previously. That could be a support or support and delivery site. Community partnerships are called out separately. It's a separate budget line item. And again, that was reinforced by the Access and Affordability Working Group, that we really want to guarantee those funds are there and that they don't get lost over the award period and don't flow into the community. So we really separate that out as a separate line item. And one thing I haven't mentioned, this again, this is vis-a-vis Proposition 14. There are funds available for building, renovation, equipment, and facilities. So there would be a facilities component to this proposed for this program. If we as we modeled it out, based on the 60.2 million, we can envision that could distribute where we'd have 3 support and delivery awards on the order of about 10 million per award, and 4 support sites awards on the order of about 7.5 million per award. So with that, I will still got a bit of time, so I'll see if there's any questions. Obviously, we're requesting recommendation from you all to approve the concept plan for ICOC consideration. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really terrific. Good job. Questions? Pat?
Yeah, so I mean, that's really a ton to unpack, and I don't, from my perspective, I'm really kind of queasy about doing this in 5 minutes. One of the things I'm really concerned about is the entry point into all this is so critically important, and I don't really have the data about the community care centers, like what are the numbers about those that seem to be able to actually carry out a human subject study? Because it's one thing to provide healthcare, it's another to actually run a clinical trial. So that's one issue. The second is that community engagement, from my perspective, really has to be crystallized and really well articulated in terms of what CIRM expects to see, because several of us have been engaged and active in our own CTSIs. And those numbers sometimes are just hollow, right? That they're not meaningful, really meaningful community engagements where there's actual activity that occurs that demonstrates the translation of engagement to participation. So, and that's going to define whatever the engagement mechanism is going to define the success of this program. So the concept, I think, is great, but I think there's some really important components that CIRM has to articulate so that the awards that are given out are going to be given to organizations that understand what their responsibilities are in demonstrating success, right? So I'll stop there because there's a whopping 3 minutes left to discuss.
Yeah.
Maybe briefly, I think when you say community care center, I think what comes into one imagines is, as you alluded to, in fact, the centers that really engage in this process, I think, are more on the order of regional hospitals, but they're well away from the alpha clinics. So for example, without naming it, one of the centers is in the sort of much further east of the coast, and they're working with cancer patients to enroll them in alpha clinical trials already. It's that level of capacity, or that I think when one looks at what it's going to take to apply for this program, those are the sort of types of applicants. Now we incentivize then partnerships with maybe more community-based providers, but I think at a baseline, that's the scale of capacity that an applicant would need to bring to this program.
So the referral from community-based providers, right, is really important. I think that's an important thing, that's how they get referred to a regional center. And we know, and I'm not an expert in this, but I read the literature. There's publication after publication, data after data about the challenges, particularly for underrepresented groups, of even being considered to be to get a referral, right? That there's major problems that we have going from community to these regional centers, which is why I say it's not impossible to do. I just think there has to be some level of understanding that these major problems exist. And if we're talking about accessibility and affordability, we have to that those who are going to apply for this need to have a real plan that's going to change the dynamic. Because
Larry, sorry, I have to get off.
Yeah.
So I hope the quorum is still intact.
Yeah.
It is. It is. We're just at quorum with your absence.
So I have a meeting at noon as well, where I have to present to my executive leadership group here in the hospital. But I think this is, to me, one of the most complicated component that was presented today. And I love the concept, but I think I have to have some more time to understand the details of how this is going to be done.
So Pat and Jeff, in view of the time, can I make the following suggestion, which is, I think we should go ahead and send this to the ICOC, because there's additional expertise at the ICOC level on some of these issues. And could I ask Pat and Jeff to work together prior to that meeting to try to address some of Pat's issues explicitly? Would that be?
Larry, it's scheduled right now to go to the December 14th meeting. So what might come out of that is that it would have to go to the January meeting instead, allowing for more time to work these things out. So I leave it to Scott, Tosher, Jeff, and Pat to sort of determine to determine that.
I mean, I agree with you, Larry. I'm happy to see it go to the ICOC, but is it going to go with approval of the Science Committee, or is it just going to go there? I mean, I don't know the appropriate protocol, but right now I couldn't vote yes on it. I would abstain.
Can I just add that, just in terms of the timeline check, we've up until now, we're on our timeline, and we've built some slack into that timeline. And so I think to the extent this committee isn't wholly satisfied and there's modifications that would be made, I would prefer to present to the board with that endorsement rather than not having it. So a delay of 1 month is completely, we can accommodate that, because again, we're on track with this program.
I agree with Jeff. I think this should hold until the January meeting, and perhaps get the Science Subcommittee back in January to discuss the subject with more information that Pat's requested.
Pat, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm sorry to throw a wrench in this, but I just think this is among the most important things that we're doing. And we spend a ton of time with staff going out to various locations in the state. And I think we should honor all the time that was put in to make sure we get this right.
I agree.
Okay.
Good.
So we'll defer to January, and in the meantime, Pat, get together with Jeff and work some of this stuff out, please.
Absolutely. I got
And-
lots of free time.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Claudette and Lana, sorry, but you're going to have to schedule another science subcommittee meeting to deal with these issues. Maria, your hand is, oh no, that's your tree, not your hand. Let's see, Scott, anything else we need to do in order to adjourn?
Absolutely not. You've had a full day, so you can just close the meeting and thank everyone.
Okay, see you again